The first time Scout returned from the woods, his paws were caked in mud. Tara thought nothing of it. He was a rescue, quiet, gentle, always staring out the window like he was waiting for something. But every morning he slipped away, and every evening he came back dirtier, more focused, more insistent. Then one night she followed him through brambles and wet leaves to a bent sycamore that stood alone in the clearing. Scout began digging, slowly, carefully. Tara leaned down and pulled out a tiny object, a child's shoe, weather-worn and stained. In that moment her breath caught. The color, the size, the laces still tied. She remembered the flyers, the little girl who vanished 20 years ago, the case no one talked about anymore. Scout stood still beside her, eyes fixed on the earth. He had been trying to tell someone, and now someone finally listened. Like, share, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories keep going. I found him at the shelter on a Wednesday afternoon. He was curled up in the farthest kennel, half covered in leaves from his own blanket, like he had given up trying to matter. His name was listed as Scout, though the staff admitted they'd picked it on a whim. No tags, no chip, no past. He looked like someone had mixed a Labrador with a bloodhound and let him marinate in red clay. Long legs, sad eyes, fur the color of dry soil. But it was the way he watched me, still, unblinking, alert but distant, that made me stop. Not curious, not hopeful, just waiting. I had no plans to bring home a dog that day, but 10 minutes later, he was sitting in the passenger seat of my Subaru, his head pressed to the window like he already knew the way. He was quiet the whole ride back. No sniffing, no whining, just the rhythmic thump of his breathing and the occasional twitch of his ears when we passed construction sites or heard a siren. The shelter staff said he wasn't destructive, but that he had quirks. That turned out to be an understatement. Scout didn't play. I threw a tennis ball in the backyard and he stared at it like it insulted his intelligence. When I tossed him a rope toy, he buried it. Every single thing I gave him, treats, chew toys, even a rolled-up sock, disappeared into the ground within the hour, and all was in the same direction, east, toward the woods that bordered my backyard. That line of trees that stretched into the old state preserve, it was subtle at first, a muddy patch here, a torn glove half buried near the fence. But then I noticed something odd. He wasn't just hiding things, he was practicing. The digging was methodical, shallow at first, then deeper, like he was trying to remember how. One morning, I found a tiny pile near the shed. In it was a spoon, one of my earrings, and a dried-out wildflower. Things Scout had pulled from the house and placed, not hidden, in a neat little triangle. That was the first time I got the feeling. Something about him was off, not broken, just haunted. That weekend, I woke up before dawn and noticed the back door was ajar. I panicked, thinking someone had broken in, but nothing was missing, except Scout. I searched the yard, calling his name, shaking a bag of treats. Nothing. Just when I was about to grab the keys and drive the neighborhood, I saw movement by the woods. There he was, trotting out from the tree line, tail low, paws dark with fresh mud. I expected him to be panting, panicked, but he wasn't. He walked up to me like he had been on a mission, and now it was done. He dropped something at my feet, a small, dirt-covered object. At first I thought it was a rock, but when I picked it up I froze. It was a child's shoe, faded red canvas, Velcro strap, tiny enough to fit in my palm. I turned it over and saw a crack in the sole, a worn-down patch on the heel. No way this came from my property. No way this had been here before. Scout sat beside me, eyes fixed on the trees, not looking at the shoe, looking at where it came from. I stared into those woods for a long time. Something about the way he had returned, like he was delivering a message, made my skin crawl. Didn't call anyone? Not yet. I put the shoe in a plastic bag, left it on the counter, and tried to go about my day. But I could feel Scout watching me, waiting. That night, he didn't sleep. He paced from the back door to the edge of the hallway, over and over, ears twitching, and just before dawn, he did it again. slipped through the door the moment I forgot to lock it. This time, I followed, through dew-covered grass, down a slope behind the fence, and into the woods that swallowed the sun, even at morning's edge. Scout moved with purpose, weaving through branches like he had done it 100 times. And finally, he stopped beside a crooked old sycamore, bark peeling like skin, roots exposed like bones. He began to dig, not frantically, slowly, deliberately, one paw at a time. I stepped closer, and that's when I saw the edge of something pale poking from the earth. At first, I thought it was just a rock, dirt-crusted pale, irregular, maybe an old root or buried trash. But the closer I got, the more my stomach turned, because it wasn't shaped like a rock. It was shaped like a hand. My breath caught in my throat. I knelt down beside Scout, fingers trembling as I brushed away the soil. The texture wasn't quite right. Stiff, rubbery, but not plastic. It was a glove, small, child-sized, pink with a faded cartoon animal near the wrist. Scout backed away a step. Not out of fear, more like reverence, like he had done his part. Like this was now mine to face. I turned the glove over in my hand. Dirt spilled from the opening, and something inside shifted. A bracelet, woven cord, light purple. One of those craft kits every little girl had growing up. Beads spelled out a name, or most of one, M-A-R. My fingers started to tingle. There was only one cold case I knew of in this town that involved a missing child. A girl named Marley. Disappeared 21 years ago, 8 years old, last seen riding her bike near the old park trail. They never found her. Just the bike, tipped over near a creek. The town moved on like towns do, quietly, uneasily. Her mother moved away. No leads, no closure. Until now, I looked down at Scout. He didn't wag his tail. Didn't make a sound. He just stared at the glove in my hand. I stood there a long time, trying to convince myself this could all be coincidence. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't. I took the bracelet and glove back home in a sealed bag, placed it beside the shoe, and sat on the couch in silence. Scout curled tightly at my feet like a sentinel. I didn't sleep, couldn't. Images rolled through my head like newspaper clippings. Marley's missing poster. The interviews, the reward fund that dried up in 2 years. By sunrise, I had made my decision. I dialed the sheriff's office and asked for Sheriff Nolan. He'd been in office forever. He was still the one who led the Marley Hart investigation, and the one who eventually declared it cold. He sounded groggy when he picked up. "Sheriff Nolan," I said. "You're not going to believe this, but I think my dog just found something." A long pause. Then, "Is this about the bones?" I blinked. "What bones?" "Someone called in yesterday. Claimed their dog dug something up in the woods, but they didn't give a name. Figured it was a prank. It wasn't." I explained what I'd found. The shoe, the glove dot, the bracelet with Marley's name. When I told him Scout had led me there. Twice. He went quiet. "Again? You're saying the dog found the exact location without you leading him?" "Yes. You think this is connected to Hart's case?" "I don't think," I said. "I know. He said he'd be at my property within the hour." When the cruiser pulled up, Scout stiffened at the door. He didn't growl, didn't bark, just stared through the glass with those dark, waiting eyes. Sheriff Nolan was older than I remembered. He walked slower, carried himself with the weight of too many open files. He didn't make small talk. I showed him the items. He handled them with latex gloves, his jaw tightening when he read the bracelet. "Jesus," he muttered. "It really is her." Scout hovered beside him the entire time, not aggressive, just alert, like he knew this man mattered. We walked back into the woods, Scout leading the way. Even with Nolan behind us, Scout kept his pace steady. He moved like he had done this before. When we reached the sycamore, Nolan crouched low, scraping back the dirt with a small shovel from his car. It didn't take long before he hit something. Bones, small, not enough to identify fully, but clearly human. Nolan stood up slowly. His eyes scanned the clearing, like it might shift under pressure. "We'll need a forensic team," he said. "This is going to reopen everything." I looked at Scout. He sat calmly in the grass, watching the wind rustle the tree branches overhead. The sheriff turned to me. "How long have you had this dog?" "2 weeks." He nodded, not surprised. "You may have just solved a 20-year mystery, Ms. Harlow." But it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Scout was still staring at the ground. And that's when I realized he wasn't done. Scout didn't sleep that night, neither did I. The forensic team had come and gone, marked the sycamore with tape, collected the glove, the shoe, the bones. Sheriff Nolan stayed until dusk, questions swirling around every glance, and through it all, Scout watched. Quiet, unmoving, like he was waiting for them to find what he already knew. After the sheriff left, I sat on the porch with Scout pressed against my legs. The woods were still, too still. And for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of trees. That night, Scout paced again, but this time, he didn't go to the door. He went to the window. He stared into the dark, ears twitching every few minutes, and once, I swear I heard him whine, soft, as if in mourning. The next morning, I left the door open. He stepped outside slowly, then paused at the edge of the yard, looking back to see if I'd follow. I did. We didn't go to the sycamore this time. He took me in the opposite direction, deeper, away from the clearing, past a stream and a crumbling old fence I didn't know existed. There, tangled in the brush, was a rotted wooden structure. Maybe it had once been a shed or a hunting blind, but now it was collapsed and overgrown. Scout pawed at the doorway. I knelt beside him, clearing vines, and saw the remains of a child's backpack, faded purple. Zipper rusted shut. I carefully pulled it free. Inside were damp scraps of paper, a cracked plastic mirror, and a name stitched in marker on the inside flap, Marley. I sank to my knees. She had been here, not just buried. She had hidden, or been kept, or worse. Scout circled the spot twice, then lay down, head on his paws. His body trembled just once, and then went still. I took the bag and called the sheriff again. This time, Nolan didn't hesitate. He came with a full team, 2 deputies, a cadaver dog, a camera crew. They treated the spot like an active scene. Scout watched them from a distance, seated on the same slope where we first saw the sycamore. When I approached, he nudged my hand with his nose. It wasn't affection, it was something closer to a question, as if to say, "Are you ready for more?" That afternoon, Nolan pulled me aside. "I never believed she ran away," he said quietly. "But I never thought we'd find this." I nodded. "There's more," I told him. He gave me a look. Skeptical, but curious. Scout doesn't dig for fun. He's been leading me in patterns. "There's something else out there," Nolan sighed. "You think the dog remembers where she was taken?" "No," I said. "I think he was there." He blinked. "Wait. You think this dog, your dog, was present when she went missing? That he saw it? Not just saw it. I think he lived through it." Nolan stared at Scout, his face unreadable. "If that's true," he muttered, "he's not just a witness. He's the last one left." That night, I couldn't eat. I sat on the floor beside Scout, studying his face, his paws, the patterns in his fur, trying to see what he had seen, trying to imagine what kind of life ends with a dog burying things he wants someone to find. The next morning, it happened again. Scout disappeared before dawn. This time, I was ready. I followed quietly, watching his movements like clockwork, through the trees, past the old fence, up a slope covered in moss and ash. He stopped near an abandoned road, one that used to lead to the park trail, long since blocked off, and in the grass, half swallowed by the earth, was a toy, a plastic unicorn, dirty, broken, one eye missing. Scout didn't touch it. He just stood there and waited. I knelt beside it and turned it over. Someone had carved something underneath, with a knife or a rock. Initials D+. K.I. stared at them, trying to make sense of it. Scout looked up the trail, not down, up, and when I followed his gaze, I saw a path through the trees, barely visible, but it was there. He took a step, then another, and I followed. The trail was narrow, more animal path than human-made, swallowed by brush and half lost to time. Every few feet, Scout would pause, sniff the air, then push forward with quiet purpose. Leaves crunched beneath our feet, and above us, the canopy swallowed the sun. 10 minutes in, we reached a clearing. It was empty, save for a cluster of rusted folding chairs and a fire pit, long gone cold. Scout circled the space once, nose to the ground, then trotted toward a pile of cinder blocks stacked behind an old stump. There, buried beneath a sheet of decaying plywood, was a metal lunchbox. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared. Something about it felt wrong, too clean, too out of place. Scout sat beside it, tail still, eyes never leaving mine, like he was waiting for permission. I took a breath and opened the latch. Inside, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, was a spiral-bound notebook. Its pages were yellowed, but dry. The handwriting, all caps, blocky, hard-pressed into the paper, filled every inch of the cover. Property of DK, the same initials, carved beneath the toy unicorn. Flipped through the pages slowly, sketches, maps, dates, and times, descriptions of targets, children. There were notes on locations. Park trail 2 open. Wooded lot behind school promising. Look into shed near heart. Place. My stomach turned. This wasn't a child's notebook. This was a journal, a logbook, a predator's playbook. Scout sat motionless as I read, and then I found the entry dated 2 days. Before Marley vanished, saw her again. Red bike, same time. Walks alone. Perfect. Wait for cloud cover. Bring rope. Gloves. I felt bile rise in my throat. I snapped a photo of the page and called Sheriff Nolan immediately. This time, I didn't wait for questions. I read the entry aloud. By the time he arrived, I had flagged half a dozen similar notes. Some were scribbled out. Others had check marks beside them. Nolan's hand shook as he turned the pages. "This is a ledger," he whispered. He was stalking them. We spent the next hour combing the clearing. They found a tin box buried under the fire pit, filled with what looked like trophies, barrettes, crayons, a folded piece of drawing paper with a childish sun scrawled in the corner. Scout stood beside the stump, eyes locked on the woods, as if he expected someone to come walking out of them. Nolan radioed for backup. They treated the scene like sacred ground. Gloves on, markers placed, photos taken. This wasn't just a dump site, he told me later. This was his camp, maybe even his home. A theory was forming. Deke, whoever he was, had stalked kids from the edges of the trail. He kept trophies. He planned, and Scout? He had seen it. Nolan pulled me aside after the team left. "We ran your dog's photo through a shelter intake database. Took a while. Turns out he was brought into a facility near Cold Creek 5 years ago. They found him tied up behind an abandoned cabin, barely alive. Cabin belonged to a man named Dean Keller. Went missing a year later. Never found. Dean Keller, DK. I stared at the notebook in Nolan's hand. "You think this was his dog?" I asked. Nolan nodded. "Or his witness." That night I didn't let Scout out of my sight. I lay beside him on the living room floor, one hand resting gently on his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of breath that had carried him through years of silence. He hadn't just survived. He had remembered, carried it, buried it, all of it, and now, piece by piece, he was handing it to me. The next morning, before the sun rose, Scout went to the door again, not pacing, not frantic, still resolved. He looked at me once, then stepped outside. This time, I didn't hesitate. We walked through the woods, past the sycamore, past the lunchbox clearing. Deeper than we'd ever gone, the forest thinned, and in a patch of dying grass. Scout stopped. He lowered his head and scratched at the ground once, twice, then stepped aside. There was nothing at first, just dirt, then a glint of metal. I knelt down, brushing it free. It was a belt buckle, old, scratched, with the initials DK carved into the surface. Beneath it was fabric, stained, torn. I didn't need Nolan to tell me what it meant. Scout had led us to Dean Keller. The air felt heavier after I spoke his name, Dean Keller. For 21 years, his name had been a shadow in this town, a footnote in whispers, the man who moved away, the man who probably didn't do it. Now, under the cold light of a gray dawn, I was kneeling at the grave he had dug for himself. Scout stood just off my right shoulder, body still, ears tilted forward. Not tense, just present, as though he had been waiting for this exact moment his entire life. I brushed more dirt away. The fabric underneath was rough and stained with time. Bits of twine stuck out like frayed nerves. When my fingers caught a button, I stopped. The smell that rose from the ground was older than rot. It was the scent of things left unsaid too long. I called, "Nolan." My voice trembled so hard I had to repeat the location twice. He arrived 20 minutes later with a team. Sirens off. When he stepped out of the cruiser and saw the belt buckle, his face drained of color. He crouched beside me. "Stay back now! Ms. Harlow, we'll handle this part." But Scout didn't move. He stayed right at the edge, tail low, eyes fixed on the patch of earth as deputies marked it off with tape. A forensic tech knelt down, gloved hands gentle as they cleared away the soil. The fabric revealed itself slowly, an old canvas jacket wrapped around a bundle of bones. The skull came last, small and caved in where the earth had pressed it. Nolan stood up and pulled off his hat. For a long moment, nobody said a word. Only the sound of Scout's steady breathing filled the clearing. "It's him," Nolan said quietly. "Has to be. Dean Keller." The tech found a second item under the jacket, a water-damaged notebook, its cover swollen but intact. The initials DK were scratched into the cardboard like a signature. Inside were pages written in the same blocky hand we had seen in the first notebook, but these were different. Fewer plans, more confessions, half-finished sentences. She screamed, but buried her under... Could not stop dreaming of... I stepped back, dizzy. This was no longer rumor. It was real. The monster who had haunted this town wasn't a ghost. He'd been here all along, hidden in the same woods where he'd hidden her. And Scout, this quiet, haunted dog, had carried that truth like a compass no one else could read. When the team finished, they zipped the remains into a bag and sealed the evidence boxes. Nolan turned to me. "You understand what you've done here?" he asked. "This dog, he just solved a case no one could touch." I looked at Scout. He didn't look proud. He didn't wag his tail. He simply blinked at me, then at the trees, like a soldier waiting for his next order. "I didn't do anything," I said softly. He did. We walked back home in silence. Scout trotted beside me, not ahead like usual. His paws stayed clean that day. He didn't run back to the woods, didn't circle the fence at night. He slept. For the first time since I'd brought him home, he slept through until morning. The town changed quickly after that. Marley Hart's name was cleared of the rumors. Her mother came back for the memorial. They held it under the sycamore tree, candles flickering in the fog. Someone placed a small red sneaker at the roots. Scout and I stayed at the edge of the crowd. When people tried to thank me, I told them the same thing I'd told Nolan. It wasn't me, it was him. I'll never know exactly how Scout survived those years, whether he belonged to Dean Keller, whether he escaped him, whether he watched helplessly as that little girl disappeared. But I know this, he never forgot. Every night he buried his memories in the ground, hoping someone would dig them up. And when he finally found someone willing to follow, he showed me everything, piece by piece, clue by clue. He didn't just survive a crime, he solved it. And in doing so, he freed us both. Now, when we walk past the woods, he doesn't tense. He doesn't pull toward the sycamore. He glances at it once, then keeps moving. We're moving on, too. But we'll never forget, because sometimes the witness who never speaks is the one who saves everything. If this story gave you chills, share it with someone who believes dogs see what we miss and remember what we forget. Subscribe for more true stories where animals lead us back to the truth.